The World Economic Forum and globalists are losing, and this is how we win. Now, the globalist agenda started decades ago with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, where the whole world was to fall in line with their goals and plans. Now, since then, we've seen it transform into other names and other goals driven by other similar players. We now have the World Economic Forum calling for what they call stakeholder capitalism and public-private partnership. And of course, ESG scores, that will be the ultimate form of control. We're seeing the results of these policies happening in real time. Global energy crisis, potential freezing this winter, global starvation, and while this appears to have been done on the surface from a political standpoint, it's really being driven by the banks and the financial system, and of course, the largest asset manager in the world. Yes, I'm talking about Larry Fink and BlackRock. But the tide is shifting. Really, it's kicking in, and these banksters are losing. We can see the cracks just starting to appear as BlackRock was forced to fold up their big fund and starting to cave. And we now know exactly how to push back so we can win. So in this video, I'm going to break down what these sustainable goals are, examples where they've been applied and the results, how the banksters and other players are involved, what their weak points are, what the major cracks are that we're starting to see, and how we can push back and regain our sovereignty and freedom. So let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos to change the way you think about money, because almost everything you've learned is wrong, and the way that they use money against us isn't really widely known either. And the way that we can use this to win is even a better story. So I got some scary stuff to show you. I got some ways that they are weaponizing against us, and it is a big problem. However, the cracks are starting to appear with BlackRock and other people pushing ESG, and it shows that we can win, and I'm going to show you the points that we need to push. So if you care about waking up and making a difference, then watch this video. All right, ESG, I don't need to spend a lot of time here. I'm sure by now you already know. Environmental social governance, that's what it stands for. It's nothing new. It's been around for a really long time. They just keep repackaging it, rebranding it, and pushing it through different organizations. It started way back here with the UN, with the Sustainable Development Goals. They call them SDGs. SDGs, ESGs, whatever. They call them all different names. Eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Check number one. I'm going to show you at the end of the video how far off, actually how we're going in the opposite direction of that goal. Let's see, reduce child mortality. That's kind of going up. Maternal health. Boy, these two have really gone downhill in the last 2 years. Combat, illnesses, whatever. I'm not going to go through all these. You get it. They've been pushing this for decades and decades and decades. We can see here that they thought that they weren't on track. And so here they're saying, oh shoot, we're not on track. There's only 8 years left to meet the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, but is there enough time? It says down here that the clock is ticking with just 8 years to 2030. Is it worth asking, how will we even get there? Like, we better step up the pace. We got to crack down because we are not meeting these goals. So you can see this now, again, that was from the UN and their Sustainable Development Goals. Now, of course, the World Economic Forum has picked this up, taking over for the UN, if you will, and they have their own Sustainable Development Goals, and now they have 17 of them. And I'm not going to go through them. Go to their website, and you can read them, read all about them. I don't want to spend a lot of time about that, but I want to show you that it's also, like I said, just continue to be rebranded, repackaged, and now this is from the World Economic Forum. They're talking about stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism, and implement the ESG reporting metrics. So stakeholder capitalism, public-private partnership, sustainable development goals, ESG, it's all basically the same thing. And we've got all the big four accounting firms and all the big banks, including the central banks, including the IMF, the BIS, all on board. So I'm going to break that down. So let's look at how they're doing this. They're doing what they call the public-private partnership. And so, of course, all the globalists from the UN, World Economic Forum, they talk about this. And so public and private. So public corporations and private businesses coming together. So government and businesses. We used to call that fascism, but now it's not fascism anymore. Now it's just public-private partnership. Now, one of the big proponents of this is Mark Carney. If you don't know who that is, he's one of the most connected people in the world. He used to be with the Bank of Canada, then the Bank of England. He's special envoy for climate and finance with the UN, leads the Glasgow Climate Summit. I mean, this is like the guy that's like pulling the strings behind all the guys. He wrote this book about a year ago called Values, and read the book. I like to take people at their word. I like to go to the source. I read it. You should go read it yourself. I've talked about it in another video before, but in the book, he says that the future, it won't be pleasant. That's what he's telling us. And the reason why it won't be pleasant is because we're not going to be able to drive as much as we drive, and we're not going to be able to fly, and we're not going to be able to eat a bunch of red meat. And so life isn't going to be as good as it used to be. Just deal with it. Basically, that's what he says. To combat this climate crisis is what he's talking about. Now, of course, if we just give him all the control and give him all our money, he could stop the world from dying, but, we're still not going to have a nice life. He will. He'll still fly around. But it says right here in the book, he says that not primarily, they want to enforce this not primarily by legislation, but by the application of non-governmental, that is, non-democratic. So they want to enforce this not through governments, not through democratic, not through voting, not through governments, but through non-governmental, that's private, non-democratic. So you don't get to say it's private, you just have to deal with it. Shut up. Pressure on the corporate sector via the ever-expanding dictates of ESG. So using ESG is how they'll force this private sector to push this down. It says here, sustainable finance, so back to that word. Anytime you hear the word sustainable, your alarm should be going off. Sustainable finance, which is designed to starve non-compliant companies of funds. So this is being done through the banks, so public and private. And so these corporations are going to push this through. If you don't comply with their ESG mandates, you'll be starved. Non-compliant companies will be starved of funds. As Carney puts it, Mark Carney, quote, climate roadkill. So you'll just be dead. We're going to run you over. We're going to leave you for dead. There won't be any money for you if you don't do what we say. Now, getting into this public-private partnership that they're talking about, a couple excerpts about this. So this public-private partnership, or again, stakeholder capitalism, these are kind of the same words here. The collective of stakeholders, which are the capitalists and their partners. Who are their partners? These are the corporations and the governments getting together, the ones who have the stake in it, comprise who? Comprise global corporations, including central banks, so multinational corporations and central banks, philanthropic foundations like the Gates Foundation, the Soros Foundation, multi-billionaire philanthropists, policy think tanks, and governments. That's who, not you. You're not one of the stakeholders, they are. Selected academic and scientific institutions. If you do and say what they want, then you're one of the selected academic and scientific institutions, as long as you go with consensus. Also, labor unions, and other chosen thought leaders, all right? The GPPP, the public-private partnership, controls global finance and the world's economy. It sets world, national, and local policy, so locally, world, it sets all the policies, via global governance, and then promotes those policies using the mainstream media. So it creates all the policies for everywhere in the world, including local, and then it promotes those policies using MSN, mainstream media, and its partners. All right. The government of one nation cannot make legislation. So under our under our current model, under our current, the way the world works right now, the government of one nation cannot make legislation or law in another. However, through global governance, as part of the public-private partnership, through global governance, the GPPP can create policy initiatives at the global level, which then cascade down to people in every nation. This occurs via an intermediary policy distributor, such as the IMF or IPCC, which of course sets the climate goals, and national governments. All right, so that's how this works. I've used this chart before. I know you guys loved it when I put it before, so I'll show you again. So this is kind of like an org chart of how this looks. So of course it's the banks at the very top. This is the BIS. If you don't know what they say, as Mark Carney said, you'll be economic roadkill. So the BIS just won't give you any money. They give money obviously through the central banks. So the BIS is the central bank above all central banks. Down below here are these policymakers, of course, the World Economic Forum, Club of Rome, the Rockefellers, etc. So the BIS and then these, World Economic Forum, etc., they're the ones that make the policies, all right? Then they push the policies down to the policy distributors. That's the UN, the IMF, IPCC, World Bank, WHO, etc., all right? This is how the whole world locked down at one time, right? So at the top, the bank decided to push this. The World Economic Forum wanted to push this policy on behalf of the bank, and they pushed it down through both the IMF and the WHO. So they said, hey nation, WHO, listen to us and we'll save your country from dying, and the IMF will give you a bunch of money, right? So that's how it happens. Then you have the policy enforcers, which are national governments. So the WHO and the IMF then push down to the national government, hey, lock your people down, we'll give you money. And then you have the policy propagandists, which are of course our mainstream media, fact checkers, etc. And then you and I, we're all the way down there at the bottom. That's the public. So that's kind of how this works as they've laid it out. All right, this is in their books. This is the way they tell us this works. All right, now BlackRock. BlackRock, where do they fit in? The largest asset manager in the world. We got Larry Fink right here. I don't even know where what he's wearing. He's the World Economic Forum meeting over here. They had about 10 trillion in assets. Now it's down to about 8 trillion. They're losing money. But they are the ones that are sitting at the forefront of this ESG movement. Now why? Why are they sitting there so much? What do they really like about it? Well, we can see here that Larry Fink's BlackRock is to benefit from government ESG push. BlackRock nearly tripled its ESG offering in the past year. So BlackRock works on behalf of the government. During the 2020 bailouts, they got a lot of money from the Fed and helped decide where it went into the market. They're also helping to push all the ESG through. Remember, it's being pushed through monetary policy, right? And who's got the money? Well, BlackRock. They're the largest asset manager in the world. Now we can see since BlackRock really came on board with ESG, you can see the search terms for ESG have just gone through the roof. Nobody even used to know what it was back here in 2017, and now we have massive amounts of search. Everybody wants to know what this whole ESG thing is about. Now, why does BlackRock like it so much? Well, they're an asset manager, so it would make sense that they like it because of the money. So we can take a look at this, and we see here it says, BlackRock still have, they always come out ahead. They can also make a lot of money creating a new type of fund dedicated specifically to ESG. So what we're going to do is tell everybody they need ESG, and we're going to create a bunch of funds that go after ESG so we can start collecting this money. And then we can charge more for it. Oh, how amazing, right? Inside BlackRock say that over the past year, Fink has transformed the place into an ESG cultural center. It's their whole focus. Fink talks ESG nonstop at company town halls. Seminars on ESG investing seem to take place every single week. They're talking about it, getting people to believe in it. Brian Deese, who you remember from the Biden administration, was promoted to push money managers to consider ESG in all their investment decisions. Now Deese is one of several BlackRock officials who hold key positions in the Biden administration. Of course, it's like a revolving door going back and forth between them. This revolving door between Washington and Wall Street gives Fink a huge voice in U.S. economic policy. An unelected leader, right, in the private sector has a huge voice in U.S. economic policy. No surprise that the Biden White House is issuing new environmental rules left and right. No surprise, because who's the one pushing that? Larry Fink. Why? Because he has a lot of money to make in that. By the end of the year, BlackRock could have as many as 150 so-called exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, that adhere to the ESG standards. But, here's the best part, but with ESG screening methods, BlackRock has found a way to inflate management fees. Okay, financial advisors, they're not your friends. They're not on your side. They're salespeople. They want to make money, they want to make commissions, and they want to push you into products that make the most commissions. So right here, BlackRock has found a way to inflate management fees on their own ETFs. Studies show that the management fees on ESG funds are more than 40% higher than other ETFs. They don't just make a little bit more money pushing you into ETFs for ESG, they make a lot. On top of it, they do other types of things, activist things like with Engine One. So Engine One is a story of an activist investor that took over the board of ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is an oil company, and they took over the board and said, hey, you should not be getting oil anymore to an oil company, which is where the profits are. And BlackRock was part of that. So basically, they're the purveyor of evil. Now, where the cracks are starting to come in, BlackRock is now forced to close its ESG fund due to a lack of interest amid poor performance. Of course it has poor performance. Of course. They're not investing for performance. They're investing for ideological reasons, like taking over Exxon and shutting their oil. You can't make it up, and shutting them down. So, of course they have poor performance, and they are now forced to close their funds. So this is the crack that I want to point out right now. Let's take a look at this a little bit more. Sri Lanka. You guys know the story of Sri Lanka. I've talked about it in other videos before, but it is the ESG poster child. As a matter of fact, on the World Economic Forum website, they put this article up a couple years ago that the Sri Lanka Prime Minister said that the country will be rich by 2025 because we're going to go directly with the World Economic Forum. We're going to do everything they say. We're going to be the poster child for ESG. We're going to be the richest nation. As a matter of fact, they became the poster child for ESG. As a matter of fact, they had the best ESG score. Sri Lanka has a near perfect ESG score of 98. Sweden is 96, and the United States is only 51. So they are the best ESG score in the nation. However, Sri Lanka has fallen. Protesters breached the official residence of Sri Lanka's prime minister because Sri Lanka suffered its worst financial crisis. Millions are struggling to purchase food. Millions can't even get food, medicine, and fuel. Energy shortages and inflation were major factors behind the crisis. Food prices rose by 80%. The underlying reason for the fall of Sri Lanka is that its leaders fell under the spell of Western green elites peddling organic agriculture and ESG. So they were going to make the country rich. They were going to follow the World Economic Forum. They had the best ESG score you could get. The problem is it took out their food and their energy. Why? Because those are the two problems with ESG. Sri Lanka faces man-made food crisis as farmers stop planting. So the food crisis was man-made. It was self-inflicted. They caused it upon themselves. And it wasn't just their food, like I said, it was their energy, which of course tie together. Sri Lanka to default on debt and no money for fuel, says power ministers. When you have no fuel, you can't grow food, you can't have commerce, you don't have any money for any of those things. All right, so like I said with Sri Lanka, they inflicted their own pain. ESG is self-inflicted pain. I've always told you, central planning always fails. All the time, every time. There's not enough data to micromanage an economy of hundreds of millions or billions of people. And so when they do things like force food policies or control energy policies for millions of people, they always will fail. They don't have enough information. It says here that in the United States, the Biden administration has been attacking oil and natural gas, shutting it down. Of course, they deny that, but we see it in the prices, so we know it's happening. The White House claimed that U.S. oil producers have plenty of opportunity to drill. Some executives are slamming them, saying that it's completely inaccurate. It's a flat-out lie. So the governments are saying that they're not doing this, but they are. So first of all, if they're lying about it, then that must mean that they already know their policies are bad. Otherwise, they should be proud of the policies they have, right? It says we've basically tracked down about 125 specific actions that this administration, the Biden administration, and the Democratic Congress have done to slow down or stop oil production in America. 125 actions to stop oil production. We can see this headline that just came out this week. The Interior rolls out new restrictions on oil and gas leasing in the United States. Again, restricting the supply of oil and gas. What happens when you have less supply but the same demand? Prices go up, and not by a little, by a lot. On top of that, they're forcing food policies. Food and energy, right? Food and energy. They're forcing food policies all across the world. We showed you what happened in Sri Lanka. Here in the Netherlands, we've been covering this for a while. They're forcing the farmers to shut down. Now the Netherlands to buy out and close 3,000 farms. Why? To meet climate goals. ESG. In order to meet climate goals, we have to shut down the farms. Sort of like Sri Lanka. Wouldn't you think we'd learn to go, look what happened, and here's the result of that? So they want to shut down these farms for climate goals. The problem is with those farms is that in the Netherlands, it's the #2 agriculture exporter in the world. They want to shut it down. The #2 exporter in the world, 4 million cows, 13 million pigs, 104 million chickens annually. It's Europe's biggest meat exporter. Europe's biggest meat exporter and vegetables to much of Western Europe. Now, maybe we don't need the food. Maybe it's just extra food. Do we really need all that food? I mean, we have an obesity problem anyway, right? Do we really need that food? Well, as it turns out, yes, we do. This is directly from the UN's website. I kept the logo there so you can see it. UN report, global hunger numbers rose to as many as 828 million. That's almost 1 billion people in this world that are starving. 1 billion. 1 out of 8 people in this world are starving to death, and yet they want to continue to shut down our food production. It just doesn't make any sense, does it? Well, on top of it, we're fighting inflation. The Federal Reserve, the central bank, the ECB, the BOJ, everyone's fighting inflation. Prices are too high. The Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, says that his goal is to crush demand. He wants to make you broke. The fact that your job is paying you more money is a problem for them, because when you get paid more money, your employer has to raise their prices. Prices go up. But the biggest, while they're fighting inflation, food and energy are the biggest drivers of inflation. We can see this over and over, and again, this is directly off the UN's website, how food and energy are driving global inflation surge. This is September 12th of this year. So it's food and energy that are driving the inflation surge. But they're shutting down energy. The Biden administration is shutting down energy. They're shutting down food, which means less supply, which means higher prices. But the central banks are supposedly fighting higher prices, which are being led by food and energy. Kind of some circular logic in there. You can see these inflation drivers here. I always like to show you the charts. You can see just how much food and energy are driving that basket of prices higher. And so how can they be fighting it when they're stuck into this situation where now the Fed is like trying to tighten things, but they don't want to crash the whole economy? But if they don't tighten them, then inflation rages. Or they could just stop shutting down energy and stop shutting down food. That might be a better option. All right, here's where the hope comes in. I know this is a lot of bad stuff. Here's the good stuff. People are fighting back. People are waking up to this. People are starting to see this. And hopefully you'll take these ideas and you'll go discuss them with other people. And you can share the video and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Okay, there's protests happening all over the world. People are waking up to this. People are pushing back on this. And we're seeing it. Now we know that the U.S. is having the biggest impact on this right now. This is one of the reasons why the U.S. is one of the biggest targets. The U.S. is the example on the hill. The U.S. is going to set the stage. And so the U.S. has to be the example. And we are leading that example. We can see here that BlackRock faces scrutiny from 19 state attorney generals over ESG investments. So the attorney generals of 19 states are suing BlackRock because they're pushing these policies that are harming people. They're harmful for people. They're causing prices to go up. They're not using their fiduciary duty to invest their money. We can see that this is growing. This is a big movement that's growing. We can see here the rise of state anti-ESG bills. Here in Texas, they said if you boycott Texas Energy, then Texas will boycott you. Texas enacted a Senate Bill 13, a law that prohibits the state from doing business with financial institutions that the state deems are boycotting energy companies. So if you're a financial institution like BlackRock or B of A or Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan and you work against their energy, then they're just going to boycott you. How's that? It says here that 10 financial companies and almost 350 investment funds have been named, including BlackRock, BNP Paribas, UBS Group AG. The Texas legislation is among a growing trend of anti-ESG legislation. 18 states have adopted it or proposed anti-ESG legislation or regulations. 18 states. This is happening. Another type of anti-ESG regulation prevents state fund managers from considering ESG factors when investing state funds. And so states are managing the people's money, and now they're only supposed to be thinking about the investment returns, like they should, not taking ESG things into consideration. In a statement, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said, quote, corporate power has increasingly been utilized to impose an ideological agenda on the American people through the perversion of financial investment priorities. They're weaponizing your money against you. ESG investments as putting ideology above shareholder profits. So you give them your money to invest it, but instead of trying to maximize your money or run the business the best they can, they're putting their ideology above everything else. But it's changing. We can see here 19 states attorney generals wrote the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now they're writing the SEC, getting them involved to look into BlackRock's ties to China and if it was prioritizing its fiduciary responsibility to investors. So fiduciary duty is a legal responsibility to do the best that you can. So now they're saying, hey, SEC, we think that they've violated this law, and we want you to go look into that. BlackRock invested and does business with Chinese companies that often flout environmental concerns, even as it pushes for U.S. companies to embrace net zero carbon emissions. So BlackRock owns all the companies with your money, and now they're buying U.S. companies and forcing U.S. companies to do very, very strict ESG compliance, which costs them a lot of money and makes them less competitive. But then they're also investing into China, into companies who don't abide by any of that. Seems like a conflict of interest. They want to look into that. They've also asked the SEC to examine the conflict in its fiduciary responsibility. BlackRock is using money of our state citizens to circumvent the best possible returns. On top of it, they're not getting good returns on your money. So we can see how this is happening. So people are starting to pull their money out of BlackRock. So we have 6 or 7 states who have now pulled their pensions away from BlackRock. We have 19 states that are suing BlackRock. We have now asset management companies popping up to compete against them. Strive Asset Management is one of them. Get your money out of BlackRock. They hate you. Why would you keep your money there? You can put it in a company like Strive Asset Management, backed by 2 billionaires. We got billionaire from PayPal, Peter Thiel, and hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman that are running this. Freedom lovers, they give you an opportunity somewhere else to spend your money or put your money, and that is making a massive difference. All right, so this is how we win, with our money. If the midterm elections didn't show you anything else, it's that your vote doesn't matter. Now, I'm not saying not to vote. It probably doesn't work, but you might as well try. But what does work is you vote with your money. You can see how BlackRock is getting pushed back on right now. They're being forced to respond. People are pulling their money out. States are going after them, and it's going to force them to change. That's how we win. BlackRock is being forced to pivot. Mega banks are now quitting this whole net zero policy that they've had. And we see U.S. banks are starting to pivot away. The way that we win is voting with our money. We stop giving our money to corporations that hate us or work against our best interests. I'm hopeful. These are the cracks, and this is how we continue to blow it back open. But let me know what you think. Leave me a like on this video if you like it. Hopefully you did. If you didn't, you can give me a thumbs down. That's okay, but at least leave me a comment and tell me why. Leave me a comment. Let me know. Are you going to vote with your money? I hope you are. Hit subscribe while you're at it, and that's what I got. To your success. I'm out.